And Oregon, they had a really fantastic first year under head coach Dan Lanning. Even though they got trounced by Georgia, this team really performed at a really high level. And Bo Nix, who would have thought that Bo Nix, the dude who had a somewhat disappointing career at Auburn, would go to Oregon and have his career revitalized? I mean, Bo Nix, there are people who are talking about this guy potentially being a first-round pick in next year's draft, and he's already viewed as a premier contender for the Heisman Trophy. Now, when it comes to Oregon making it into the college football playoffs, it is going to be really tough to do because they're playing in the Pac-12. The Pac-12 is going to be a juggernaut this year, and they got a really tough schedule. You got to go on the road to play Texas Tech. They're going to be pretty good this year. You got to go on the road to play Washington and Utah. And you got to play USC and Oregon State at home. So their road to the college football playoffs, people, is not easy. But when you look at this team, with the fact that they have Bo Nix, they're going to have a good chance to be able to be in the college football mix. Now, you are wondering, JT, how's his offense going to look with the departure of Kenny Dillingham, who now is the head coach of Arizona State? Well, they replaced him with offensive coordinator Will Stein. And Will Stein was the co-OC down there with the UTSA Roadrunners. And their offense was really dynamic. Not only was he the co-offensive coordinator, but he also was their QB's coach. So many Oregon fans have a lot of faith and confidence in Will Stein. Dan Lanning, this is somebody who I think has done a fantastic job at assembling his coaching staff. He's learned under Kirby Smart, who does a really good job at building good coaching staffs. So I trust Dan Lanning's judgment, and I trust that Will Stein is going to have this offense clicking at a really high level. And I think that Oregon's offense is in good hands under Will Stein. The wide receiving core is fantastic, amongst the best in the Pac-12. You got Troy Franklin, who may be the fastest receiver in college football. You got Chris Hudson. He comes back. You got running back Bucky Irvin. This dude was averaging damn near 7 yards per carry last season. Do you know how insane it is to average nearly 7 yards per attempt? Now, if you want to be exact, he has 6.8 yards per carry that he had last year. And then you got Noah Whittington. Now, the question that most people have about Oregon's offense is going to be in the trenches on the offensive line. Now, Oregon, I'm just going to give them the benefit of a doubt, and I think that this offensive line is going to be pretty good. I know when you look at it on paper, it kind of gives you a little bit pause for concern, but Oregon normally recruits the offensive line really well. And normally they do a really good job at developing the offensive line. And even though Mario Cristobal is gone, I still think that there's a good amount of talent on this offensive line for it to be pretty good. So I'm not really concerned about Oregon's offensive line. Now, this defense is probably the biggest question that you should have about if Oregon's going to be a college football contender, man. Because in the Pac-12, there's not really too many good defensive teams in this conference. You got a lot of teams who air the football out. And if Oregon's going to have a shot at making it to the college football playoffs, this defense is going to be what makes or break them. You're going to have to play Texas Tech, who's more than capable of being able to put points up on offense. You got to play Washington and Utah. And you saw what Washington did to this offense last season. And then you got to play Oregon State. You saw what Oregon State did to Oregon last year. These boys won the game, and they didn't really need their quarterback to throw the football at all. They were running the ball on Oregon. And they also had some key plays on special teams. So for Oregon, this defense has to be way better than what it was last season. But I think that it will, because Dan Lanning is a defensive-minded head coach. He was a defensive coordinator back there under Kirby Smart at Georgia. So if you're a defensive-minded coach, you should be able to elevate the play of your defense. So there's no reason why Oregon's defense should be as bad as what it was last season. And playing in a conference like the Pac-12, you have to be able to slow down these quarterbacks. You're going to be going against Michael Penix, Caleb Williams, Shedeur Sanders, Cam Ward. These are some of the better quarterbacks in college football who are more than capable of being able to dissect your defense if you don't have a good secondary. Now, they did hit the transfer portal pretty hard. They do have a good amount of returning production coming back on defense. I think their defensive line looks pretty good. They got edge rusher Jordan Burch from South Carolina. Dan Lanning and this Oregon coaching staff have been raving about his performance during spring practice. You got cornerback Kyrie Wilson, who transfers from Alabama. I don't know how many of you guys remember, but he was the number one JUCO prospect coming out of 2021, and he didn't really play that much for Alabama outside of special teams. He's going to be pretty good this year. You also have Evan Williams, who is a transfer from Fresno State. He was one of the better defensive backs coming out of the Mountain West Conference. This is a really good Oregon team, and can they make it to the college football playoffs in 2023? I think they have a fantastic chance. When you talk about teams who a lot of people like to make it to the college football playoffs out of the Pac-12, most people are going to tell you USC and Washington and possibly Utah, but I really like Oregon to be that second team right behind Washington. I do like Caleb Williams and USC, but I don't really know how their defense is going to look. And if I had to put more faith in Oregon's defense than USC's defense, I will. Just for the simple fact that Dan Lanning is a defensive-minded coach and Alex Grinch isn't really a good defensive coordinator. So I think for USC, yeah, they're going to be able to score a lot of points on offense, but who can't score a lot of points on offense in this conference? This conference is going to come down to what team can get the best performance out of their defense. And I think the two best defensive teams in this conference that have the best shot at being able to compete for the Pac-12 is going to be Washington and Oregon. And for USC, defensively, I just don't know if it's going to be good enough to get them in that conversation. You got Caleb Williams, so you're going to have a phenomenal offense, but I don't know about that defense. I have way more faith in Oregon's and Washington's defense going into this year than I do USC. This is not a conference that you're going to be able to win just outscoring everybody. Eventually, you're going to have to get some stops on defense, or you're going to hope that your offense has a chance to win a game. But even then, I really think that Oregon has a strong chance to make it to the college football playoffs. Your only concerns are going to be how is that defense going to perform? And I think it should perform at a pretty high level with Dan Lanning being a defensive-minded coach. He should be able to get the most out of that defense. And Dan Lanning is a pretty damn good coach. I don't think anybody expected Oregon to have as good as the season that they had under him in year one. And going into year two with a good amount of production coming back on that defense, and you add some talent in the transfer portal, Oregon should have a defense that's good enough to help them compete for the Pac-12 championship and possibly make it to the college football playoffs. Now, if I had to give you a definitive yes or no answer, do I believe Oregon will make it to the college football playoffs? I probably would tell you no. Simply for the fact that I like the Washington Huskies a little bit more than I like Oregon. Washington has a squad this season. They have one of the best teams in college football. They have several guys who are going to be drafted highly in next year's NFL draft. And for Oregon, yeah, I do think their defense is going to improve, but overall, I just think that Washington has the most talented team in the Pac-12 going into this season. But I do think that Oregon has a pretty good chance of being able to make it to the college football playoffs. It just all depends on how improved that defense is going to be, and is that offensive line going to be good enough to step up and still give you the same production that you have had at that position for the past couple of years.